Welcome to the Polite Conversations podcast, where every episode is focused on civility, decorum, and good manners. And I'm your lovable, non-controversial host, Ina. If you know me, you know I definitely don't like to ruffle any feathers at all.
Hey there, lovely listeners. I've been meaning to do this little episode for a while, but it kept being put off by other projects I was working on. I know I've talked about the recent challenges with the podcast a couple times before, so I've needed to do this for a while. It's just been a really weird and demoralizing time to produce work in, and simultaneously expressing my thoughts through the podcast is also one of the few things that feels appropriately cathartic in this strange moment. It's hard to even articulate all the mixed emotions, all the thoughts and feelings, but this ongoing live stream genocide in Gaza has really laid a lot of things bare. It has truly been life-changing for me to witness all this in real time. Social media has just made it all feel super close and personal, and it's been really something to see how it has been normalized, how even some so-called left-leaning progressive type people either choose to remain silent on this or justify it in some cases. It has been a time that's really opened my eyes to how blatantly colonial, racist mindsets are not just something we've relegated to the history books, like I once may have naively believed. We are completely surrounded by them on a massive scale. Like friends that I felt completely safe and comfortable with, I will never see in the same way again. It's been like a zone of interestification of everything happening around me, you know? And I never wanted to view any of this through a racial lens, but after months and months and months of it, I cannot help but notice in my real life that the people who will speak out against the horrors Israel inflicts on innocent civilians every single day are almost all non-white. The people who have come out and posted things online for every other cause, the people who are largely silent in my life, just happen to be white. And I hate so much that I'm seeing this clear divide along racial lines. It has been truly jarring and just really uncomfortable. It's shaken my understanding of the world, of the society I live in, of the friends I've made over the years. Like even 2016 Trump era, which felt bad and unsafe, it doesn't get close to what this feels like. And of course, that isn't to say that all white people are silent like this. I've seen plenty of wonderful people online making themselves visible and fighting for Palestine, which is really so important because that's how privilege should be used, you know? And of course, there are so many incredible Jewish people fighting the good fight. One of the only things giving me hope right now is seeing so many different kinds of people speaking out against one of the worst, most well-documented atrocities of our lifetime. But unfortunately, aside from the people of color that I know speaking about this, I just don't know any of those people in real life. And all my pro-Palestine friends have reported seeing similar divides along racial lines. And it's just depressing to see it in this day and age, you know? It's a painful reminder that subjugation and domination, the humiliation of people considered lesser, is ongoing. The project of colonialism is alive and well. And those in power rub it in our faces every single day. The blatant double standards where one Israeli life is worth more than tens of thousands of Palestinian lives, where the genociders get to redefine targeting babies as self-defense, and nearly the whole world's politicians and media structure goes along with it. With the recent exploding devices in Lebanon that have hurt and killed civilians in civilian areas, including children, it has just been so disgusting to witness the glee and the praise and normalization of what was essentially a terrorist attack in the headlines of Western media. The fact that Arabs and Muslims, though I am neither, but I do feel connected, obviously, the fact that those lives mean so little to so many people in this part of the world shows that they aren't valued as fully human. I mean, this is the message being sent out every single day. I once thought that much of the world agreed there was something sacred about not targeting journalists, about healthcare workers, about not targeting hospitals and schools. Had Islamists even done a fraction of what we see Israel do on a daily basis, the world would understandably be outraged. I have never shied away from criticizing Islamic extremists. I've stood in solidarity with journalists targeted by them. But the silence right now is deafening on the hundreds of Palestinian journalists being murdered and targeted so they can't show the rest of the world what's happening. The silence on the healthcare workers being systemically tortured and eliminated. My friends who once changed their profile pictures for the Charlie Hebdo staff have little to nothing to say about this. People are excited about, quote-unquote, saving democracy through Kamala, who is happy to continue arming a genocidal state. And as every last bit of humanity in the West slips away, I feel like I'm going crazy. Heck, the rationals online, the free speech warriors who are always outraged when it comes to anyone experiencing the mildest consequences for using racial slurs, have nothing to say about the literal targeted bombing and silencing of almost 200 journalists now. I once thought that most decent people agree that some things are universally sacred, but clearly nothing is sacred, it turns out. And most people, at least those in power, are not decent when it comes to Muslims or Arabs being mass slaughtered on video all day, every day. Israel has helped to showcase a lot of things about the Western world in general. And while these things were always present in the background, they were never made clear so openly like they are in the present day live stream genocide. And those types who hyper-focus on anti-vaxxers being the main bad thing online, to the point of downplaying bigotry, misogyny, racism. I mean, don't get me wrong, anti-vaxxers are very, very bad and very dangerous, but so is, say, spreading the great replacement theory, especially when, like, mass shootings happen with manifestos that mention that kind of stuff. But if your main concern about people who do both of those things is just anti-vax, then that's a problem. Those extremely rational types, though, have also little to nothing to say about Israeli officials stating their intent to spread plagues as a weapon of war, and then bringing back an eradicated disease like polio. There's no comparable outrage about that. And then there's so many of those who claim to cover fascism and the far right, extremist ideologies, culty groups even, who cannot see the obvious fascism on steroids when it comes to defenders of Israel. Or if they do say something mild in criticism, they'll both sides it, at best. How do I trust their coverage on anything fashy or culty anymore if they can't see the most obvious things right now? If you have blinders on when it comes to the current extremist ideology responsible for a literal genocide being carried out on your social media news feeds, then your analysis and critique of these things on the whole is dangerously limited and cowardly. I really hope that all these types of mass atrocity deniers and genocide centrists, because, really that's what they are seen for what they are eventually. I mean, surely that fence these fence sitters have spent the last year on has got to get pointy and uncomfortable by now, right? There are also many, many so-called feminists who remain silent about the very specific traumas that women are having to endure in Palestine right now. C-sections without anesthetics, no menstrual products or sanitation, starvation to the point of not being able to produce breast milk, systemic sexual abuse. I mean, if your feminism only extends to Muslims oppressing women, then it's a one-dimensional caricature of feminism. If you care about the Taliban forcing women into oppressive modesty garb, then you should also care about the perverts in the IDF rifling through the underwear of women they've bombed to pieces. Bombing is pretty fucking oppressive, if you ask me. By April of this year, the Euromed Human Rights Monitor estimated that Israel dropped over 70,000 tons of bombs over Gaza, which is more than in the bombing of Dresden, Hamburg, and London combined during World War II. CBC and PBS called it the most destructive bombing campaign of this century, all while both Israeli and American officials openly called to flatten and nuke Gaza. By early November last year, just a month into it, Mother Jones reported that Israel had already dropped the equivalent of 2 nuclear bombs. A recent report by Save the Children claims it's now the equivalent of 6 nuclear bombs, all in an incredibly tiny, densely populated area like Gaza, which is half the size of Toronto, where I live. About the same size as Las Vegas, but with more than 3 times the population, according to the Washington Post. An area much more densely populated than New York City, but where people are trapped and being starved and being concentrated into smaller and smaller camps. I am just in utter disbelief half the time, paralyzed by the insanity of it all, the gaslighting and the complicity, the doublespeak of our liberal politicians expressing concern about the deaths while simultaneously refusing to stop arming these savage slaughterers. I just don't know what to say or do anymore. Every direction I look, people that I expected better from are such a disappointment. Large leftist content creators in particular. Imagine having a large platform and choosing not to use it in an urgent moment like this. Some even saying, well, what can I do? I'm just a content creator. There have also been a couple of heartbreaking realizations in my real life with people I was once very good friends with, who are now obscenely posting pictures of flags in support of a country engaged in long-term apartheid and escalating genocide in full view of the world. The targeting of children with snipers, the countless real images of beheaded babies with literal hollowed out heads, beheaded by Israeli bombardment, the well-documented torture and rape of civilians, of medical staff, the rallies in support of the rape. All of that has done basically nothing to move the needle in regards to any of our supposedly human rights valuing, international law respecting countries in the West. They still haven't used any leverage at their disposal to make this mass slaughter stop. Almost a year into it, and I hear both Kamala Harris, who gave me some hope for a brief period of 3 days, and our own Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, repeat endlessly debunked lies about Hamas and human shields and systemic sexual abuse, not providing a shred of evidence for their claims, and meanwhile ignoring the mountains of evidence or video footage, report after report by human rights organizations, that this is being done to Palestinians, not by them. Every single day I see Western media whitewash Israel's unhinged crimes through desperate, nonsensical headlines, and it is maddening. But I explained that whole backdrop to share where I'm coming from at this moment in time, the general state of mind I'm in. The lack of motivation really stems mostly from all of this, of course. But also not just the awful state of the world, but the awful state of the internet too. Seeing literal pro-genocide podcasts gain more and more success. And then the genocide centrists are also lauded for their rational, measured takes. And I think to myself, how the fuck is it rational to both sides such immense cruelty? I see bros with bad research, praised for bad research. I see bros that have been involved in Me Too shit, paint themselves as victims, and keep podcasting like nothing ever happened. And their liberal audiences lap it up. I see people willing to put so much effort into their grifts, like setting up 6 different Patreons to cash in on the same shitty content multiple times. I hear of people setting up their Patreons to charge people per post instead of per month, which if it suits you, that's fine, I guess. But then they're doing multiple blank posts per month so they can make up their expected income and charge their audiences multiple times for non-content. And somehow their audiences keep sticking around. Then there's grifters like Ruben and Tim Pool who are getting paid something like $100K per video. It seems insane that anyone would think we live in a meritocracy. There's also Silicon Valley funding on the right. The revival of phrenology through that shit. Just so much astroturfing on the right and center even. Because maintaining the status quo is popular and comfortable. I just feel so tired inside of this type of online economy, against the backdrop of the world being destroyed. It feels like the game is rigged. I just don't know what to do with that. I have no desire to squeeze people for every drop possible, like some others do. I'm not looking for fame. I would rather be anonymous instead of recognized while out with my child. I've turned down multiple opportunities for that reason. So I don't know how sustainable that type of mindset is in this type of ecosystem. And of course, there's also Elon's destruction of Twitter, which was a major avenue to generate interest in one's content, and it really no longer is, especially as a small-time leftist content creator. And you have to understand something about leftist spaces. No one, despite their proclamations of justice and progress and uplifting minority voices, no big content creators are really doing that, unless they're your friends. There's only a limited amount of money on the left, and I suppose everyone is competing for it, which is the complete opposite experience of being on the center or right, because I can attest from being more new atheisty and I suppose centristy back in the day that ecosystem is entirely different. They are desperate to get their message out and validate it, and will uplift every, even mediocre as hell newcomer. That's where all the money is. People are way more motivated to fund and support voices that legitimize and rationalize their viewpoints. That's where you make important friends with large followings. That's where you get larger and larger platforms. So I just don't know. This is already not a very leftist-friendly space. And being a non-bro podcaster also feels a bit isolating. You don't have a perpetual built-in cheer squad of other bros. And being a person of minority background is never great in online spaces, as many of you will know firsthand. And then being a person of Muslim background right now just feels really unsafe. even for a non-believer like me. It doesn't matter to bigots how much or how little someone believes in scripture. Everyone of Muslim background is automatically perceived by them in a certain way. With the beef-related lynch mobs in India targeting Muslims, the race riots in Britain blaming Muslims and people of color, with the genocide in Gaza causing so much anti-Muslim hatred to be brought to the surface, it feels like a very strange and vulnerable time to be putting myself out there. Yet, as I mentioned before, it also helps me deal with a lot of what I'm describing. But all that said, I am so eternally grateful to my patrons who have made this work possible and motivating thus far. I truly, truly am. I don't think I can emphasize that enough. It's helped me connect with so many interesting, wonderful people from around the world with such similarly precise interests to mine that it's been incredible, It was 2016 that I started this podcast with the help of none of the men who have bizarrely over the years claimed that they helped me launch it. So we are nearing a decade almost, which is a pretty big deal in the podcasting world. There have been a couple of times that I truly thought I'd have to stop for a while at least. I did not know when I was pregnant how manageable it would be to do a podcast with an infant. But, we got through it. I remember there was an interview where he basically decided that day he was going to stop being a sleepy newborn, right then. And in the middle of it, he was wide awake, making a big fuss, which I was totally not expecting because he'd otherwise sleep for very long stretches as long as I was holding him, which I was. I think that interview was with an Iranian activist about Quebec's proposed religious symbol ban. Yeah, that was a wild ride. I was up and pacing, bouncing him around, trying to get him to settle down during this very serious interview, which, as you can imagine, is completely distracting as an interviewer. I was surprised I even managed to ask some coherent questions during that time. But yeah, what I'm saying is, you and I, patrons and listeners, we've been through a lot together. You were there for me when my family went through an unbelievable tragedy a couple of years ago. It really feels like you all have been an important part of my life, my real life. What I'm saying is, I really appreciate you. And you know what? Hey, thank you to the hate listeners too, because you're there too. But, it sounds like I'm getting ready to say goodbye, but I'm not, to be clear. I will, however, kind of have to change things around here a little because the online world, especially nowadays, is just not feeling so great. And if you speak up about Palestine, which I'm pretty much going to do all the time till this nightmare is over at least, there have been plenty of reports of that kind of content being deliberately suppressed. The algorithm is basically working against you if you mention these things. I've heard so many creators talk about it. Something has definitely changed with my podcast numbers, but, due to the vague nature of these things, I can't say for sure what exactly is affecting my listenership or reach, but I do know that for the past year, it's been bizarre to see a very noticeable difference, a contraction, some of which I'm told is explained by a change in how Apple is counting podcast listens or something. But I don't know. There's a distinct lack of growth. New patrons are a trickle compared to what they used to be, and I'm putting out more work, better produced work than I was before. Of course, some of it just may be explained by saturation and the general economic hardships that so many of us are experiencing. There are just so many podcasts now. Even so much regular media has become subscription-based because everyone's just trying to survive. So there's simply not enough to go around for all those subscriptions. None of that, of course, is motivating to continue to put so many hours into it and release the work for free to the public. So I simply can't afford to keep putting out hours and hours of content for free, as much as I would love to, and believe me, I would. It was always patrons who helped keep it free, but even that has become more strained and sparse. Less algorithmic reach for the podcast means less patrons sign up, unfortunately. And also, Patreon will soon be implementing some changes, thanks to Apple, that will certainly impact smaller podcasts like mine. I'll talk more about that in an upcoming episode, but the short version is Apple is screwing Patreon, and Patreon are passing the costs to us. And either we change how we charge new patrons that sign up through the Apple app, or we absorb the entire cost ourselves. Neither a great option. For now, any new patrons signing up, use the browser version of Patreon, not the app on your Apple devices. If you're on Android, you should be fine. And these changes will be implemented in a couple of months. So that'll be so fun to see the results of. But basically, I've never put more work into research and production than now, and not seen the Patreon levels grow proportionally. I've already tried cutting back on the miniseries, as I'm sure people will have noticed, but some of that is also because I simply can't stomach Harris's genocide cheerleading nowadays. Someone just shared a clip with me today where he's fucking peddling the anti-Haitian immigrant pet eating stuff, for fuck's sake. I mean, he's just so fucking gross. There's nothing he won't stoop to. I've tried to and started work on the next Woking Up like multiple times, but for my own sanity, I've just needed to step away from that. Just needed a break from consuming that level of vileness. I will eventually get back to it. I myself want to document these things, so I won't be satisfied till I do. Maybe someday people will see Harris for what he is and stop laundering him as a reasonable intellectual. But yeah, for now, what I'm regretfully going to have to do, at least till something changes, is that I will be releasing partial episodes on the public feed. Full extended episodes will only be available to subscribers. Again, I would really love to keep putting all the content out in full for public consumption, but I simply can't afford to when not enough new patrons sign up when I do that. If that changes at some point, we can absolutely shift back to the old format of the podcast. You can certainly help change it. There are even annual subscriptions with a discount for as little as $10. So if you value the work and would like to see it survive and thrive, please do consider becoming a patron. I realize this is the intended effect of a hostile online ecosystem squeezing out minority voices, and I did try to resist it for a while, but, I've got bills to pay like anyone else. It's just a fact that more people seem to promote and favor podcast bro perspectives, so unfortunately, that's what the market will reward more. But if you are looking for a non-bro podcast from a very niche perspective, a non-right-wing ex-Muslim recovering new atheist who grew up in a theocracy known as Saudi Arabia but isn't quite Saudi, and still wants to advocate for secular causes but also examine the extremism that stems from these spaces or is adjacent to these spaces, well, if that's what you're looking for, I'm your guy. Non-guy, I mean. And, of course, you'll still get a portion of the episodes on the main feed, just that the one on Patreon will be the extended one, that's all. And maybe every month or two, I'll drop a full episode as a PSA. I'm just going to go with the flow and see how things go right now. And I still have one more episode scheduled that will not be paywalled, but after that, it's going to be on Patreon. So, if you can, consider signing up and helping the show. If you can't, I totally get it. Times are tough all around. Things keep getting more expensive and paychecks are still the same, mine included. There's a few free ways you can support the show, and I know I mention these often, but they are really important in helping others find the show. So firstly, you can retweet the content, and that is always appreciated. Leave a comment on Twitter or Blue Sky or Instagram, because that really helps boost it in the algorithm. And if you haven't yet left an Apple Podcast or Spotify review, please consider doing that. That too helps boost the show and helps other people find it. Then you can also subscribe to the YouTube channel and like the videos. Leave some comments to boost them too on the fucking algorithm that we're all a slave to. There's also like a selection bias with these things. People who are happy with the content often don't say anything because they're content, you know? People who are angry about something or critical will be more likely to leave a comment, making many of the reviews and comments seem like they're coming from angry incels and or Douglas Murray or Sam Harris fans. But it'd be nice to have some more from people with a positive thing or two to say, you know? And of course, if you're not subscribed to the podcast in your podcatcher, please do that. That is a very important way to support the show. If you're a patron and subscribe to the Patreon RSS feed, if you could subscribe to the regular one too, that'd be great. It doesn't happen often, but occasionally I will post something on the regular feed and just link to it on Patreon, so it's good to have both, you know? And as always, the holidays are upon us. This is when I open up art commissions. If you'd like to commission a pet portrait or a people portrait or a house portrait, you can email me at nicemangoes.blog@gmail.com, no E in mangoes, or send me a DM or something. Again, a massive, massive thanks to the patrons who have kept this show going for all these years. None of this is possible without you. Here's to hopefully many, many more fun episodes on Patreon, and a huge thanks to all the listeners who have been listening to this show for years. You too help keep it going. Don't worry, I'm still around, but I'll just be around even more on Patreon. So yeah, that's all for now, friends. Keep listening, and free Palestine.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support it, there are several ways you can do that. You can share it online, talk about what you just heard. You can leave a 5-star review to help others find it too. And you can also subscribe via patreon.com/nice mangoes. No E in mangoes. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter before it's completely wrecked, you'll find me at Nice Mangoes. Again, no E in mangoes.